The task before the Senate in the National Defense Authorization Act is nothing less than to craft a sustainable long-term strategy to defend America. In fact, it is to sustain our global leadership in a time of shifting alliances, significant challenges, emerging threats, while bringing a long-term balance and sustainability to our military. This defense measure is a solid start, but it must be made stronger to better meet the needs of our military men and women and our nation as we enter this supremely perilous time. The danger to America has never been greater. Our foes have never been more insidious and pernicious. And many of the states opposing us have never been more willing to take measures that fundamentally contravene not only our security, but our sense of moral right and wrong. And so I approach the National Defense Authorization Act with this principle in mind. Neither the United States nor our troops nor anyone involved in our national defense should ever face a fair fight. Our men and women in uniform should never be challenged in the air, on the sea, or on land with a fair fight. It should be one-sided in our favor. That's the basic principle. We must be superior in our military armed forces. And I am grateful to the chairman of our committee, Senator McCain of Arizona, an extraordinarily distinguished veteran and a partner in a number of amendments to this measure, and to the ranking member, Senator Jack Reed, also a public servant of extraordinary distinction and a veteran, for their leadership in bringing us to this point on a bill that attracted bipartisan support, overwhelming support on the Armed Services Committee, where I am privileged to serve. The provisions in this bill will enable us to remain the strongest country militarily in the world. At the end of the day, our values, our way of life, our democracy give us our real strength. But a military is necessary to defend those values and our quality and way of life and our values and traditions and our fundamental rights and liberties, which we worked hard last week to uphold in the USA Freedom Act. I have filed a number of amendments that underscore the need for continuing improvement in this bill. They are forward-looking. One of them would modernize the National Guard's helicopter fleet, providing vital capabilities for the military, as well as the sustainability and growth for Connecticut's dedicated defense industry. To protect our heroes in uniform, I've also proposed an amendment that would provide stronger legal tools against predatory lending and other abuses targeting our military men and women nearby their very bases where they are stationed. These two amendments, 1820 and 1564, are the subject of extended remarks, which I ask unanimous consent to be placed in the record. Thank you, Mr. President. I've also joined Ranking Member Reed in co-sponsoring his amendment that will set forth a responsible and sustainable budget strategy, ending sequestration in our military budget and allowing us to ensure that all of our nation's key security priorities are addressed. Tomorrow, this body will vote on that amendment. It's a critical vote. It allows us to choose sides as to whether we will put close to $40 billion in effect in our national debt rather than in our budget, on our credit card rather than in a sustainable means to pay for it. Each of us will have to decide whether we want sequestration, which I am committed to end, or instead go forward by paying for $40 billion out of the operating contingent overseas contingent operations, known as OCO, as we have done for years and years. Sequestration cannot be allowed to become a permanent fixture. We must work together in a bipartisan manner to end it. In my time in the United States Senate, I have fought for our national defense funding because I believe that our troops in harm's way deserve our full, uncompromising, unyielding, unstinting support. We owe them the best equipment, the best training, supplies, as well as institutional support and health care that the world has ever seen, because they are the best fighting force that our world has ever seen, and they fight for a nation that is the best, strongest, and greatest in the history of the world, not only in its military strength, but in its fundamental values and freedom that allow us to speak in this very chamber as we wish, to criticize authority, to speak truth to power, to debate, to come together as we did this weekend, to worship, gather together, and say whatever we please and think as we wish. And I hope that we will address this vital interest in making sure that we provide a sustainable source of funding by ending sequestration rather than relying on the overseas contingency operation account, which is a form of borrowing. It increases the deficit, not reduces it. It diminishes stable and sustainable funding, not enhances it. It simply provides more uncertainty rather than a long-term strategy. This measure, which I support, enhances our security by providing for the construction of submarines, the Virginia-class submarines that are necessary, and in fact, the NDAA provides $800 million in additional funding to what the President requested, and it endorses equipping all future attack submarines with an enhanced payload capability. Naval warfare, and particularly undersea warfare, is as relevant now and important as it ever was, and these submarines will do much to enhance our readiness, our nuclear deterrence, our special operations, our surveillance. They are the stealthiest, strongest weapons platform undersea ever known to man. Likewise, the research and development in the Ohio Replacement Program will go forward. And the bill provides for $1 billion for 6 additional Joint Strike Fighter aircraft for the Marine Corps. It's profoundly significant, as well as $17 million in new military construction for the Connecticut National Guard. There are other measures, but apart from the hardware, is an important step for fairness in keeping faith and dealing fairly with our men and women in uniform. A 1.3% pay raise and $85 million directed toward improving financial literacy among our service members, really the very least we can do. Our military men and women do not serve for the pay. They're not there for the financial compensation, but for their families, we need to deal with them fairly and keep faith with them. And in my role as ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, I have paid special attention to ensuring that this bill helps to ease the transition of military personnel into civilian life by establishing a new record of service card on their separation that will help prevent identity theft and financial fraud. And I urge the DOT, as does the Armed Services Committee, to discontinue its use of Social Security numbers on military records. It will help prevent identity theft and the kinds of breaches that put our servicemen at risk financially, just as they are often at risk physically in combat, and their families. The bill also directs DOD to stem the tide of opioid prescription drug abuse, and it helps military retirees get access to smoking cessation assistance. And I would go further and provide for stronger measures to deal with opioid prescription and overprescription through education programs, through drug formularies that provide alternatives, and that is one of the amendments that I will offer. Finally, let me say on the two principal amendments that I will propose. We can strengthen this bill by fulfilling our commitment to the National Guard in providing 15 additional helicopters that are the workhorse of our warriors who serve in our National Guard, warriors who have distinguished themselves in combat, but also in emergencies and disasters at home. These helicopters will help them serve at home and abroad, which is one of the reasons why these helicopters, A-model Blackhawks, are one of the priorities of the National Guard Association. I have listened to my National Guard in Connecticut. I have listened to representatives of the National Guard, distinguished warriors and veterans around the country. And I know that these A-model Blackhawks are the workhorses. They are important in medium lift capability to the National Guard in support of homeland defense and response to emergencies. They now, many of them, lack onboard capabilities, modern capabilities that would enable them to be deployed overseas in hostile environments without significant upgrades to other parts of their configuration. They need that upgrade to be configured properly. Under the Army's current budget projections, the Army National Guard will not replace these units until 2025. And we need to do better, we need to do it more promptly, and that is why I am proposing Amendment S 1820. On the Service Members Civil Relief Act, penalties, quite bluntly, are too low. That is why I want to thank my colleagues, Ranking Member Reed, as well as Senators Durbin, Murray, and Whitehouse, all of whom have been working tirelessly and have joined me in proposing stronger protections in the Service Members Civil Relief Act, doubling the penalties and making them as high as $220,000 for each violation in the event of multiple violations. Deterrence, punishment, and a stop to this kind of financial abuse that may take place literally within sight of military bases. Abuse financially that we've seen by Sallie Mae when it foreclosed improperly on service members' home. These practices can include these kinds of abuses involving foreclosure and other kinds of exploitation, which Sallie Mae unfortunately engaged in doing. Student lender Sallie Mae sidestepped requirements, and I'm quoting, "Federal law protects our service members from having to repay loans under terms that are unaffordable or unfair by charging excessive rates to borrowers who filed documents proving that they were members of the U.S. military." And this type of conduct is more than just inappropriate, it's inexcusable, and it will not be tolerated. I ask my colleagues to join me in voting for Senator Reed's amendment tomorrow. We face critical decisions ahead. This measure has extraordinary merit. We must keep faith with those who serve, and I hope that we will when we vote this week on the National Defense Authorization Act.